of the critically acclaimed but often controversial Fables comic series, has recently announced that due to irreconcilable differences with DC Comics, he is unleashing his works into the public domain in hopes of his work getting into better hands. Is this something he's able to do, or do his contracts with DC prevent it? Does it even really matter when the Fables comics are based on public domain characters already? What does this mean in the current climate of writers struggling to be treated fairly by the corporations that hire them? However this ends up going, may all writers wanting to toy with a fairy tale crossover of their own find inspiration. Welcome to a special episode of Retelling the News,
aka re-roasting the writers, aka revisiting the atrocities against comic book ladies, aka remembering the Orientalism of it all.
Clearly, we have a lot of issues to deal with in this episode. As you guys can probably guess, that was Shami Karanakaran, and also joining us today is Grady, and we are going to be talking about the major comic book news that dropped this week, specifically regarding the comic book series Fables, and its creator, Bill Willingham, announcing he is going to unleash it into the public domain.
And this is all Gary Gygax's fault. No, seriously, because Willingham started out as an artist for TSR working on Dungeons & Dragons. So, no Dungeons & Dragons,
really?
no this episode of the podcast.
Huh, I don't know how to feel about that.
This has been another episode of Connections with James Burke.
I mean, yeah, this podcast is all about the connections between different methods of storytelling, so I guess that does make sense. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, Fables is, well, I would say it was a proto version of a certain TV show, but we're still on strike, so bring on the pen, $1 a pen to the Creator Fund.
I guess you could say that we've had people do this twice.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, how I was initially introduced to this comic book series was, I've mentioned her before on the podcast, my mentor from back when I was in high school, Melissa Bobby. She knew I was super into fairy tale retellings, so she recommended the comic book series to me. And my listeners, please note that this is not a positive in my mind these days, but this was in the oddies, so we weren't as conscious of the issues regarding this, but she described it as the fairy tale characters having its own Israel, basically. Which is, from what I could tell, was Willingham's intention, from what I've done in my research. It does seem like that was intentional on his part, which doesn't even start getting into his more problematic tendencies, shall we say. It actually took me years after that to even get to diving into this franchise. My first experience with this universe was actually the Telltale game, the mobile version, The Wolf Among Us, which was a murder mystery set in Fabletown. And I did play, the first part of it, and that was really interesting. Then at one point, I did actually read the first 2 volumes of the comics. And again, the art's very good. And I do like a number of the concepts, particularly the fact that between Beauty and the Beast, whenever they're having relationship problems, he turns back into a beast. I thought that was really interesting. And for the most part, from what I've seen, I do enjoy the character of Bigby Wolf. But I definitely started getting a little uncomfortable with some of the hints at his more conservative leanings. Specifically, at one point, Snow White had become pregnant. They were just like, okay, you could probably take care of that. And she was so offended that someone would even suggest it. And also, she basically says something along the lines of people shouldn't expect their governments to take care of them. I was already getting red flags, so I was just like, you know what? I don't need to read the rest of this series, no matter how pretty it is and no matter how much of my wheelhouse it's in. And apparently, all of that is the least of our problems with this guy.
It's just the shallow end of the cesspool.
You're lucky you didn't go to the deep end.
Why don't you guys tell me a bit more about the deep end? Because Shami, I know you've read a specific arc, and Grady, you've read the whole thing.
So how I wound up finding this was I was a fan of an indie comic that Willingham had done called Elementals back in the 80s, which was about 4 people who all died at roughly the same time and all came back, each one of them with powers linked to one of the 4 classical elements, earth, air, fire, water. And then I hear that he's got a new book coming out with an artist whose work I love. And I think, okay, I'll take a look at the first issue. I know a comic store where they'll let me read stuff and then decide whether I want to buy it or not. I'm a big fan of film noir. I'm a big fan of people taking an established story and retelling it with a new spin on it. So having all the Grimm's fairy tale characters in a film noir storyline, which was the opening thing on that, I was hooked. and I was hooked hard. And yeah, when we got to the part where Snow White and Big B get magically roofied and she gets pregnant, I was like, ugh. But I powered through. When we got to the part where the doctor in the main part of Fabletown is telling Snow, you're pregnant, but I know what to do with this, and she says, if you finish that sentence, I'm having you exiled. I was like, ugh, but I powered through it. There was a bunch of stuff that I was like, ugh, but I powered through it. I read the whole thing. I really enjoyed it, but I was really getting increasingly exasperated with Bill Willingham. And Jasmine, are we allowed to actually curse on here, or do we have to censor ourselves and not say the entire word?
No,
we're allowed to curse. We're allowed
Okay,
to
curse away. We're all adults here.
So we're starting the fuck Bill Willingham counter at 1 here. The times that I'm going to be increasing the count will happen further on. But yeah, so it's just, it was something that I was drawn to because it was a writer that had done some interesting stuff in a previous series with an artist that I loved. And I loved the art the entire way through. And I grew increasingly aggravated with the writer of the thing as it went on for some of the stuff that he did in there. And also another thing that I'm trying not to go off on a rant on right now because Shamila hasn't had a chance to talk. And I'm going to put a pin in that and let you have the mic now.
So, Fables was always sort of on the periphery for me. Like, I was aware that there was a game, that there was a comic, but I didn't know the full details until I took a comic book class during my graduate school days. And for our first assignment, we had to write a paper about a specific issue within comics. And like the very ambitious, bit off more than she could chew writer, I decided to focus on the history of representation of Muslim women in comics.
Oh.
Yeah. And there was a part where I had to write about to list out the stereotypes in various comics, and Fables came up during the run of this, and I read some of it to see what was going to be going on, specifically the Arabian Nights arc, and I just felt my blood pressure skyrocket and all the bullshit.
Okay, so what exactly did they do to our beloved Scheherazade? Because I am very concerned.
So before we go into like what they did to Scheherazade, we got to get into like the generals. So not only do all the Arabian fairy tale fables, they speak horrible English, and I don't think even Baba Yaga was written with any sort of phonetically funny accent that's hard to read.
Editor Jasmine here, I looked it up. Nope. No, she was not.
And we had the right characters making fun of them for their English being unintelligible. And then...
I don't remember Sinbad having problems with being understood, but that was like the one character that I can kind of say that about.
Oh yeah, well, Sinbad is portrayed as like a reasonable ruler, but that's mostly attributed to him listening to the Western fables and advocating for Westernization for the Arabian fables, which, yikes.
Yikes!
So much yikes.
And then we have a second command, Yusuf, who portrays Sinbad for greater power, and he criticizes him for being too Western. That's not even the worst part. Yusuf's design is straight up racist character compared to Sinbad. He's like drawn with a trifecta of horrible Middle Eastern villain stereotypes. The hooked nose, the pointy beard, and the curly mustache. And like, you see a panel of him and Sinbad side to side, and he looks practically inhumane next to him.
Oh.
Don't get me started on the designs for the female Arabian fables.
No, do it!
Yeah, they cover their faces, but they're egregiously drawn with their bodies exposed because someone has to cater to white male gaze. And does not help that Snow White is described as a rising sun, while Scheherazade is summer twilight, and it just reeks of colorism so much. And then it just only gets worse from there. Then there's the plot where the Western fables find out that the Arabian fables have brought jinns with them. It's less of a benign stereotype and more full-on anti-Muslim commentary, because the jinns are literally called weapons of magical destruction. I kid you not.
Yeah, just let that one sink in.
Yeah, and then the biggest gripe for the whole Arabian Nights arc is what they did to Scheherazade, who is probably the most iconic woman in Persian mythology, and she's the central storyteller of 1001 Nights. But here, her role and accomplishments are given to Snow White, and her telling Western fairy tales instead of the classic stories from 1001 Nights. And when I was reading this, I initially assumed that Scheherazade had been written out like her sister was, but then we see her visiting Snow White to thank her for white savioring her, and I will make that a verb one of these days. And to add insult to injury, Snow White even suggests that Scheherazade tells stories to the king. She's outright telling her what to do to keep the king entertained, as if it was her idea in the first place. Poor Scheherazade, she's just robbed of her story, her agency, her personality throughout this storyline, and for what?
Can we decrement the fuck Bill Willingham counter again?
Yes.
We can. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I think people are so quick to forget that, like, Islam was one of, like, the first religions to give women's rights to property, to initiate divorce and contract. And historically, some of the literature reflects this. With Scheherazade and 1001 Nights, we have someone who's willing to step in and do something impossible to save other women. She completely owns the kingdom and the king, not because she loves him, but she's doing this for the good of her and everyone else in the kingdom. I think if this went the typical Western route, they might have made a heroine of a story like this, seduce the king or make him fall in love with her. But that's not what Scheherazade does. He goes about saving herself and the kingdom through creativity and the power of her words.
I can say there are definitely retellings that do make it a romance. I'm pretty sure I've read one at one point, but...
But all of this said, full disclaimer, if you're gonna write any sort of Middle Eastern, North African characters, reading and understanding Edward Said's Orientalism should be mandatory, because otherwise you end up with bullshit like this.
Yeah, Persian Cinderella, this is not.
And then there is the monolith, because when they say Arabian, we specifically mean Persian. This is specifically Persian. We are not a monolith.
No, of course. And unfortunately that happens with a lot of various ethnic groups.
Yeah.
But damn, like, just that alone, I am terrified, because I know you have more, Grady.
Yep.
How bad does it get from there?
Well, I want to circle back to something that I had mentioned to get a little bit more detail on the part about when Snow White and Bigby get magical roofied.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so you know how the real hardline conservatives tend to think liberal activists are? Imagine somebody making a character a lot worse than that, and then realize that you haven't gone quite far enough and make them even worse than that, and you will start to approach Goldilocks, as handled in the Fables.
Oh dear.
Goldilocks is the embodiment of what conservatives would mean if they ever used the term white feminism unironically.
Oh God.
Goldilocks is how a middle-aged conservative man would picture a college woman activist, liberal type.
Oh no.
Who preaches equality, but is really all about getting rid of the existing power structure so that she can be in charge of things and essentially Animal Farm everybody. Which I'm using that in part because the major storyline that she winds up getting involved in is actually called Animal Farm, because there is a place called The Farm, which is referred to in the game, where all of the fables that cannot pass themselves off as human have to live.
Right, yes, I do.
They literally send them to a nice farm upstate where they can run and play with the other animal shaped fables.
Editor Jasmine here. I meant to bring this up while we were recording. Why does this magical universe not have glamour for these poor animals? Literally every other fantasy universe has some version of a glamour to allow those who can't pass as human normally pass as human. How the hell did Bill Willingham not think of that? Or was he just trying to create the pointless drama?
So Goldilocks is all about how, hey, guys, all those rich, powerful fables that are living in the city, that don't let you live amongst them, that won't let you leave the boundaries of this place, that don't care about you. Unlike me, because, you know, I'm cool. There's a storyline about the Goldilocks manipulating the animals into following her because some of them are literally sheep. And she, you know, when Bigby starts to get on the trail of this, and Snow is involved in the initial stages, and they see a meeting of the revolutionaries, and Goldilocks has them hit with a spell that removes their memories. So, yeah, that's how Bigby gets Snow pregnant while neither one of them can remember who they are. And that is an entire rabbit hole unto itself. So the I am all for animal rights Goldilocks, who is actually just trying to set herself up as a dictator. She is the horrible, evil, scheming person that conservatives like to claim that activists for social change all are.
Yikes.
There's also a bit that I like the basic idea that he's got, where the reason why Snow White and Rose Red can't stand each other, which is a running theme throughout the thing, it turns out there's a curse placed upon their family, where every time there's more than one woman born to the family, they have magic that runs in their blood, and it causes them to turn on each other, all Highlander style. But the way that he pushes that storyline to its conclusion, there is both figurative and literal character assassination that gets involved, and I'm still kind of pissed off about some of the people that wound up getting done dirty that way.
And I mean, even, like, it's an interesting idea, but it also is basically inherently a, oh yeah, women can't get along, lol.
Bitches be crazy, right?
Exactly. Like, it's inherently trying to kind of hammer that shit home, and it's just like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Editor Jasmine here. I promise I'm not going to yell this time. But in better hands, this sort of thing could have actually been a commentary on how society likes to pit women against each other. Like, that I would like to see.
There's the whole thing with Jack, both in the main book and his spin-off.
He's basically every single folklore Jack, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are some things that he does with him that I like, but for me, he really only works as a supporting cast member in Fables. So Jack is an unrepentant bastard. He is a horrible person who is only in it for himself and is only really works, as far as I'm concerned, as a foil for someone else who is a better person and has to deal with his bullshit. Well, when you take a character like that from something and spin them off into their own show or book or what have you, you have to make them be more than they've been shown to be so far in order to really give me a reason to buy into watching this. And I tried reading Jack's book, and it just kept not doing that. It was all about how he was always outsmarting everybody, and he was always doing it by the most dollar store John Constantine bullshit ever. And
So all of this, with all the baggage included, is something that Bill Willingham is trying to unleash into the public domain, mainly because DC has been screwing him over. Do we want to delve further into that part of it all?
So Vertigo was a sub-imprint of DC. That's the company that published Fables, and that he dealt with them through. But so now that they've folded the Vertigo imprint, everything is essentially just DC regardless. And DC has done a remarkable thing. They have created a situation where I'm actually on Bill Willingham's side, which, as previously mentioned, and I'm decrementing the counter again, fuck Bill Willingham. And whenever you want me to go into the Stephanie Brown thing, just let me know so that I can take a sip of water, take a deep breath, and see how coherent and sane I manage to keep myself.
Now seems like a decent time, unless...
Okay, so I can't really comment about before Frank Miller's book, The Dark Knight Returns, comes out. And yes, I promise this is actually relevant to where I'm going. Just context drop first for those who don't know about it. So Frank Miller in Dark Knight Returns does a thing about an older Batman who's retired, goes back into fighting the fight as Batman, and he gets a new Robin, Carrie Kelly, who was the first female Robin and was a big deal. I don't know to what extent women readers were asking DC, hey, can we get a girl as Robin? I know that there was some, don't know exactly how widespread it was, but after we get this thing with Carrie Kelly as Robin, there's a bunch of women readers who are like, hey, guys, how about you just go ahead and bring Carrie Kelly in, or just give us a girl as Robin? And eventually, when they do a thing about how Tim Drake, the then current Robin, was putting up his cowl for a little bit, they decide to do a storyline where Stephanie Brown, who was an existing character that had connections with Tim and therefore to the Bat family, winds up getting the job to be Robin. And Bill Willingham is writing the main Batman book at the time, and Bill Willingham decides to give us a storyline about how the people who have been asking for a girl to be Robin are dumb because Stephanie Brown sucks at being Robin. According to Bill Willingham, decrementing the counter again, fuck Bill Willingham. And then, full
villain voice,
Bill Willingham gives us the War Games storyline. where he's like, yeah, guys, I know I gave you a story that was all about how Stephanie Brown was stupid and had to be fired. I'm not done yet, guys. So he writes a storyline where Stephanie Brown is trying to get back into the job of being Robin by taking a set of plans that she had gotten a hold of while she had access to the Batcave about how Batman was laying the groundwork for taking over organized crime in Gotham using a superhero who, as far as most people knew, was actually a villain as his figurehead. But the key to the thing was an identity, Matches Malone, that Bruce Wayne created to allow him to pose as a criminal to get information and intel and infiltrate operations to bring them down. And of course, he's not in the loop on this one when she pulls the trigger on this plan, and it winds up with her being brutally murdered. It's like Willingham looked at Jason Todd being beaten to death with a crowbar in Death of the Family and said, hold my beer, tortured.
He made it worse.
For hours, just grotesquely brutalized, portrayed generally off panel, but with sound effects to make it absolutely clear that you know something horrific is being done here. She's tortured to the point of being near death when Batman finally gets her, takes her to Dr. Leslie Tompkins, who is a supporting character for those of you who don't know. She is one of the two people, her and Alfred were the ones who had been established as being Bruce's primary caretakers in the immediate aftermath of the death of his parents. She was written as the ultimate pacifist who, even if someone held a knife to her throat and tried to threaten her to do something, she would not lift a hand in anger or in violence against anyone. And Bill Willingham writes a comic where, while Stephanie Brown is in the care of Leslie Tompkins, who has healed more than one person who has attempted to personally murder her, who believes that life is sacred, all life, regardless of who you are. I think she's actually been stabbed by someone and only paused long enough to bandage her wounds to give them the treatment they need in order to recover from whatever their wounds were. This is the person that Bill Willingham writes a story where she lets Stephanie die in order to teach Bruce a message about having kid fucking sidekicks.
Oh my
That's
god.
Bill Willingham.
Oh, no. It's horrific.
I don't remember exactly when that was. I think it was the 2005-ish. I can't think about that storyline in any way without my blood pressure spiking. I despise Bill Willingham for doing that. A later writer brought Stephanie back to life and had a thing where they're like, oh no, Leslie didn't actually let her die. She faked her death to try to snap Bruce out of whatever she was trying to snap him out of. I don't care exactly what's going on there because, honestly, that issue where he committed the literal assassination of Stephanie Brown and the character assassination of Leslie Tompkins soured me on Batman for the better part of a decade.
I mean, yeah, that's not really the kind of thing you can just...
No. You can't just gloss that over.
It took them almost a full decade to be able to undo the damage that was done to Leslie Tompkins and Stephanie there. I will hate what he did to both of those characters until my dying day.
It's just, this just goes beyond fridging. It's just...
No, that's fridging someone and then strapping the fridge to a fucking bomb.
Ugh.
That's a good way of putting it. And now Mr. Willingham and DC seem to be on really bad terms.
Yeah, and after having gone off on that long of a rant, to reiterate something I said before, DC Comics has actually found a way to put me on Bill Willingham's side on something.
Yep,
Which is saying something.
Yeah, like, that should tell you all how much DC has fucked up here. So, from what I can gather, basically, DC has been mishandling how Bill Willingham gets paid in regards to the Fables comics and have just been kind of misusing the property. Like, am I more or less right on that?
That's part of it. Also, when he was talking to them about doing a sequel series to Fables, the initial contract that they got to him classified it as work for hire, which would have essentially stolen the rights that he owned because it was sold to Vertigo as a creator-owned property. And they tried to take it away, and when he pointed out, hey, guys, this is bullshit, they were like, oh, sorry, just stock language. We'll replace that paragraph with a we're not actually trying to steal your shit thing.
But they're still very much trying to steal his
DC
shit.
Comics, respecting creators' rights since 1939.
Oh, wait. Yeah, because this isn't exactly new with them, is it?
Oh, no. This is actually looking like the second time that DC has tried to fuck over a creator so badly that they are going to cause a major shift in an industry practice. I would like everyone to imagine their local bookstore, if you still have one, and the comic section, if it has one, how it has all those trade paperbacks of comic storylines. Now, imagine 1984 trade paperbacks as an industry of the publishing profession didn't really exist then. So Alan Moore signs a contract with DC saying, the rights to these characters will revert to you once this book goes out of print. Which, in his expectation, back when, they would occasionally do a reprint of something, he's like, okay, 18 months or so after the book hits the stands, rights come back to me and I can tell more stories about them if I want to. And then as it's getting close to the point that it would officially go out of print, the graphic novel is born as a genre in America.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Watchmen has not gone out of print.
Oh, God.
It's almost 4 decades now. They are never going to let enough time go between reprintings of Watchmen to allow that clause in that contract to ever actually fire. Because of what happened to Alan Moore, the contracts that people sign are they take trade paperbacks into account. And now we may be looking at something like that going on with creator-owned works like Fables.
Because, he is trying to basically unleash the rights to his particular versions of it, because, as someone joked on Twitter, on the one hand, it's not that huge that public domain characters are being unleashed into the public domain, but on the other hand, the fact that it is these very specific versions, that's not really something that happens.
Which is saying something.
Not at this level of prominence, anyhow.
Nope, and he basically said that choose to give it away to everyone. If I couldn't prevent Fables from falling into bad hands, at least this is a way I can arrange that it also falls into many good hands. So I truly believe there are still more good people in the world than bad ones. I count it as a form of victory. Basically, because DC is screwing him over, he's just like, okay, fine. Then everybody can do whatever the hell they want with my property.
I'm going to play the one card I've got.
Basically. Now, DC has gone forward to say that, no, that's not how this works. You can't do that.
It's because of the rights that they hold to the published stories. And so it's a gray area that is going to take some lawyers who are going to get very rich off of people in order to actually do this. But we're more likely to wind up with a situation like what happened with the Siegel family, where instead of actually having to battle it out in court, DC finally put enough zeros on the check for the family to say, you know what? Okay then.
Yeah, pretty much. Which they could afford to do. But with that logic, they could have afforded to, not totally screw people over in the first place.
Well, yeah, but they are a company that will only let go of whatever money they cannot find a way of getting out of.
At this point, we're going to have the comic book writers striking.
They'd have to unionize first and...
Yeah. Which, is not impossible. We did just have the VFX workers joining IATSE, so, who really knows? Hot labor summer / cool labor autumn have been very interesting to behold. People have basically been saying this really does feel different, and I do hope that it's true in the best way possible. Okay, let's say for argument's sake, this is actually going to be possible. Willingham is actually going to be able to do this. What are we all thinking of that?
Rewrite the Arabian Nights run. I don't care what you have to do. Let Scheherazade be at the forefront and show how brilliant she is.
I was going to say, also, if you are going to do the Arabian Nights storyline at all in a rebooted one, don't have them just show up out of nowhere after you've finished one major storyline. Actually make us aware that there's a thing with those fables earlier in the book, so it's not like, wait, what?
At least, give us hints, there's some sort of correspondence between Snow White and Scheherazade, or Sinbad and King Cole.
Right.
Yeah, and honestly, because so many fairy tale crossovers do kind of bring up the idea that there is one particular storyteller of them all. Of all characters in folklore, I can't think of a better choice than Scheherazade, to be honest.
Yeah, she's the originator of it.
Exactly. I am hard pressed to think of a better choice there, but because of Eurocentric ideas of storytelling, it pretty much never happens. But honestly, even if it doesn't turn out to happen, as that one tweet that I that joked about how it's really not that huge of a deal, that it just so happens that these particular versions of public domain characters are trying to be released into the public domain, because you could pretty much do your own Fables, and as long as it's not too similar to this Fables, no one is going to really be that mad about it. And from what you have probably heard in our little rants here, I can imagine most of you could probably do better with this concept.
Take it as a challenge.
I would like to do my usual plug something thing that I always do in these, and I am not going to go with anything that might fall as struck work. I am instead going to go with a comic that has major female characters that are handled in a very interesting way, in whatever meaning of interesting you've got in mind probably applies to at least one of them. Adam Warren's Empowered, which started out as his way of dealing with the fact that he was not getting any work from any of the comics publishers and had to make a living by going to conventions and selling commissions. And because he worked in what in the industry is referred to as the good girl style, a lot of his commissions wound up being woman superheroes in bondage. And so as a way of venting, he started drawing comics of a woman superhero whose name was Empowered, who kept getting overpowered and tied up all the time, as a way of just venting his spleen about, this is the way that I'm paying bills and getting food on the table. The concept is, it's someone who majored in superhuman studies that one day gets this super suit that gives them immense powers. The suit is, however, fragile, and the worse the suit becomes damaged, the less power she has. When we first meet her, all of the storylines are one variation of something tears her costume and she gets tied up. You might have to grit your teeth on some of the early stuff, but I recommend reading it, because when that one succeeded, and then when the next volume succeeded, and when the more volumes he was able to do, the more he started getting into who these people are, why are they doing this, and who have I not had interact with each other. Let me see what sort of stuff happens there. And there's some amazing story stuff going.
Shami, you got anything to plug?
Well, you can find me on Tumblr at @Karuna, and that paper that I mentioned at the beginning of all of this, it's actually been published, but unfortunately because they had to cut a lot of it down in order to make it fit for publication, which means my whole thing on Fables did not make the cut. But hopefully I'm able to do an updated version and do a section on Fables, as well as the multitudes of webcomics with Muslim women in them.
I have one last thing.
Go for it.
Because the counter, as my count has it, is only at 6. Fuck Bill Willingham.
And even if the creators are terrible people and terrible writers, DC, please respect their rights.
Yes, exactly. Like, I guess that's the main takeaway here, is that just because a writer creates things that you do not care for does not mean we still don't want you to be able to make a living doing what you are clearly passionate about. Can't believe that has to be a controversial statement now.
In this economy, it is.
Because, yeah, no, like, you will see all these people commenting about how the writers that are striking right now don't deserve what they're asking for, because have you seen the past 10 years of writing? And it's just like, okay, first of all, you're basically saying that these people don't deserve to make a living because they wrote something you didn't personally like. Fuck you. And also, like, maybe if these executives protected their rights more, you'd get better quality shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I did turn this into being about the strike, so sue me.
Solidarity.
Yes.
Solidarity.
That is my forever. And as always, you can find me at Faye Riviera on Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok. We also have a Twitter account for this very podcast at IER Podcasts. And we are actually starting a Tumblr page where you lovely listeners are welcome to ask questions or even make a request for something that we can cover. Just tell us how much you enjoy this or how much you don't enjoy this. We could take the criticism, it's fine. And you'll probably find all sorts of bonus thoughts on the subject matter of this podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and that was Retelling the News.